Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. Esther Cohen is a poet and book author who believes that people from every walk of life have stories that deserve to be told. A longtime labor activist, she has organized photograph exhibits for union workers, led writing workshops for women in prison, and has even taught writing classes in a supermarket. In her latest book, All of Us, Stories and Poems Along Route 17, she shares the stories of her neighbors in a tiny town in rural upstate New York. Her subjects come from very different social-economic backgrounds, education levels, and political persuasions, but manage to coexist peacefully, side by side. Perhaps they offer a lesson for these troubled times. Esther, I'm really going to allow you to introduce yourself with one of your poems.
That's great, because I know not everyone likes poems, so maybe they'll like this one. It's called Allen Ginsberg, or I Wanted to Be a Poet. When I moved to New York City in the 70s from Ansonia, a small factory town in Connecticut, Allen Ginsberg was who I wanted to meet. Jean Boudin, a good beat poet, said Allen will see anyone if they'll buy him breakfast. I found his number from Kenneth Koch, and I, an office temp at Rochester Button Company, had plenty of breakfast money. In the diner, he was Allen Ginsberg and I was Esther Cohen. Ask me anything, he said, in exchange for 2 fried eggs. Can I be a poet like you, I asked. Not having read even one word, he said, you are a poet, Esther Cohen. Can I quote you, I asked. You have my lifetime permission, he said, and all these years later I am. Part 2. A while ago at a poets' retreat in San Miguel de Allende, the British poet laureate, a sir, did not like my poems. You, he said, infusing the you with the ultimate British disdain. You, he repeated, are in the very same category as that American poet, Allen Ginsberg. At long last, I replied, at long last.
That's great. And so you are a poet, and you have, in All of Us, you have written poems and vignettes and sort of little short stories about the people in Middlefield. Why this book?
Well, you know, first of all, it took me 37 years to write this book, and I want to say that because I know many viewers want to write books and they're upset that they haven't done it yet, or they're, not able to do it now. And it took 37 years, and it's a book, so that's one thing. Another thing I want to say is that 37 years ago, 4 of us decided to buy a house in upstate New York, and all 4 of us live in small, rent-stabilized apartments in Manhattan. And the idea of having a house was kind of fantastic. We wanted a house for no practical reason, just we wanted a house. So we looked and we bought this house after a year that was absolutely mythic in some way. It had rooms and a kitchen. It had all the things that houses have. And I was lucky because I was able to work from the summer in our house in upstate New York with my baby son, Noah, and the help of a babysitter, local babysitter. But I was very concerned my first summer that the only people I knew were going to be people who were like me, who came from Manhattan or Brooklyn or some other place and had a country house and didn't really connect to the local community. So because I've always been a writing teacher, I thought, I'm going to teach writing in upstate New York, and I want anyone who lives here to be able to come to the class. So I went to the only supermarket near us in the town of Cairo, New York.
And you said that's like 22 miles away?
Yeah, it's about 22 miles away. So there was a supermarket called Slater's, run by a local guy, really interesting local guy named Bud Slater. And I went to see Bud Slater and said, can I teach a writing class in the supermarket? And he said, yes, we'll try it, but only if you'll be in the bean aisle, because that's the least trafficked aisle in the supermarket. People weren't buying canned beans, and he still had them on the shelf. So he put 12 folding chairs in the bean aisle, and he gave us all notebooks and pens, And the requirement to be in my class was you had to shop at Slater's, which was pretty much everybody. And so we would go into Slater's and you would hear on the loudspeaker telling you that chicken was 59 cents a pound. You would hear also, Esther Cohen is going to teach writing in the bean aisle. And that was my first upstate class. And the first class was full. There were 12 people on the 12 chairs. And they were amazing. They were amazing. And one was the oldest employee of CVS in the state of New York. And one was a guy who owned the local hardware store who has an Irish radio show about Irish music. Everybody was amazing,
Yeah.
every single person.
I want to hear about your neighbors because they're very disparate group, and you have 52 stories altogether that I counted. How did you collect them?
Well, first of all, the book is fiction. I have to make it very clear that this is not oral history. I didn't ask anybody to give me their life story in some oral history kind of way. But I do love people and always have. And so I pretty much invited every person I ran into to come to the porch and sit with me and tell me as much as they could. And I heard one amazing story after another. For example, we had, because it's a big house and it's old and things are always falling apart, we had a cleaning person help us every summer. And I would put a little ad in the Penny Saver, which is a local free handout, and get a cleaning person from the handout. And one woman who I hired, who I ended up being really connected to, came in at her interview and she said, and I wrote a little poem about this, she said, I had 4 husbands and 3 of them died. Guess how they died? And I hired her immediately. She told me nothing about her cleaning abilities, but I was really fascinated by the fact that she had 3 dead husbands and 1 live husband.
How about the guy at the post office?
Paul, the guy at the post office. Post office, so this little town that the story is based on is the town where we live, of course, and there is no public space except the post office. And so any activity that occurs in that town is the post office. And, you know, everybody goes there and talks to each other and the post office is as big as this little table. We stand against the wall and listen. And one of the postmasters was a guy named Paul, who was a politically pretty much opposite from me, and funny and charming and interesting. And, you know, I spent a lot of time listening to Paul, who told me that story I told was true. He told me that I was the only customer who would probably want to buy a Jimi Hendrix stamp because his other customers were anti-Jimi Hendrix. So,
Then there's the lesbian photography teacher who left her longtime partner from the East Village and bought a house in Middlefield where she met her new partner.
She met a new partner. Yeah, love occurs in Middlefield. There's a lot of love in Middlefield.
Okay.
And there's a poem I wrote, also based on a true story, about neighbors who fall in love with each other, and they married, and they moved to another town. And I asked the readers the question, will they fall in love with their neighbors again, somebody else in the new town? Because that seems to be something that happens in upstate New York. People fall in love with each other.
And there was the wealthy couple from New Jersey who sold their perfect house in New Jersey and moved to Middlefield and started to create another perfect house.
They did.
I would imagine that their political views might have been some different from
Mine.
From your own.
Correct. I think it's fair to say that a lot of my neighbors have different political views from my own. A lot. You know, when my first summer there with my son, there were people who lived next door. The guy was a science teacher, 5th grade science teacher, and a newspaper delivery guy. And he gave me a T-shirt the first summer because he told me he gave me this because he saw me eating dried papaya sticks, and he thought that was an indication of my politics. So he gave me a T-shirt that said, Ollie North for president. which I wish I had now because it's probably worth a lot of money.
Is there a favorite story that you have from the book?
You know, the story that I read most often myself is the story about the mythic neighbor across the street who was arrested and how his wife handled it. It's a story about a working class guy who's a Teamster truck driver who was arrested. And he was arrested in his 70s for the first time in his life because he felt like he'd never done anything wrong and he wanted to finally do something wrong. So he took his boss's credit card and he used it. And the boss found that out and police came and they arrested him. And the local police had to explain to his wife that he was arrested, and then he had to explain to his wife why he finally wanted to do something wrong.
Okay. I hope he didn't do any
He didn't.
jail time.
He did no jail time, and the boss, you know, in the court, the boss said, I forgive him, he's my friend. He was
Wow.
released.
You write about this beautiful Irish housekeeper who told wonderful stories that you felt that some of those stories may not have been true.
Correct.
Does a story have to be true to have value?
You know, that's a fantastic question that I've been dealing with my entire life. I believe that all stories are true. Every story is true because it comes from someplace inside you that you don't know really before you tell the story. But it's based on something you know. If you didn't know it, you couldn't tell the story. So, you know, I'm probably the wrong one to talk about truth in some moral imperative way because I believe everything is true. I read a lot. I read all the time.
You believe there's truth in every story.
I believe there's truth in every story.
Why is it important to tell the stories of the people in Midfield?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I felt when we moved there that the most important thing for all of us to do was hear one another. Not to judge, not to try and convince somebody that they were wrong about what they believed about zoning or, you know, any number of things, who they voted for and why and what they think about this issue or another thing. I always thought what was important was that we hear each other. We talk to each other. We don't just talk, we listen, and we hear each other. And really, I think today, that's the most important thing that any of us could do because we're so polarized and we have so many judgments about, you know, every single thing from large things like the horrible war in Israel and Gaza and small things like, should I eat gluten? People fight about all this stuff all the time in a very self-righteous, sanctimonious way. And I think it gets in the way of us connecting.
And the fact that the people, the residents of Middlefield, are able to share their stories, do you think that is why they're able to coexist peacefully?
I do.
Or as Rodney King said, can't we all get along? Is that the reason?
I do think that, you know, everybody doesn't get along all the time, of course, and we all still disagree about a lot of things, but we've formed a community where we help each other and we're supportive and we know one another and we know the names of one another's relatives and we say happy birthday to each other in spite of what we believe in. I think that's how all of us should be, especially now.
We're going to take a short break, then we'll be back with Esther Cohen, the author of All of Us. Welcome back to One to One. I'm talking with Esther Cohen, author of All of Us, Stories and Poems Along Route 17. When and why did you start writing?
Wow, that's an impossible question to answer. I started writing when I was a little child. I was very young, and my first publication, that sounds like, you know, my first whatever. My best friend and I started a magazine in the summer called Gab, G-A-B, and we mimeographed it. There used to be this thing called mimeographs. Right. We mimeographed it. And I wrote all about my neighbors. I wrote mythic stories about my neighbors. And at a certain point, I wrote exclusively about my next door neighbor, Joni's love life. And I made up boyfriends for her, and I made up a husband for her, and who was a nice guy named Howie. And that was kind of the beginning, my official beginning.
You've said, quote, "Stories are our lives. They are what we know and how we say who we are. Our words are breath for us all."
Right. What do you think about that? What do you think about stories?
Well,
You're a journalist.
yeah, and I've also taught journalism, and in one of my classes, in fact, the first day of class, I would have the students in the class interview each other and find their story or find the story in what they had to say. Because it just, as you've suggested, everybody has a story. Everybody has a good story in there someplace and something. And I think what the stories do is connect people because you can identify something in that story that touches you. So I do agree that finding out people's stories is how you get to know them. Now, you had a lot of work as a labor activist. You've done
Right.
a lot of work for low-income workers,
Right.
and encouraging them to tell their stories in different ways,
Right.
sometimes in writing, sometimes in other ways.
Right. I agree with what you were saying before. I think stories are what connects all of us, and everyone has a story. And we don't have the opportunity to hear the stories of many people. You know, the number of people who are writers is small. A lot of people have really hard, busy lives and don't have access to the method to tell the story. So I've been trying for many years to figure out ways for other people to tell stories. And I'm using all of us to do readings and writings with a bunch of groups. I'm doing something with baristas, for example. New York City.
Baristas?
Yeah. New York City has 65,000 Spanish-speaking baristas. 65,000. And we don't even know that, you know, and we don't know that who they are and how they came to do the work they do and what they did when they lived in their countries and so on. So I'm doing that with a friend of mine who's a Spanish translator to get the stories of baristas. But, you know, I've done writing classes with fast food workers, and I started, for many years, I worked for the Hospital Workers Union, 1199, running their cultural program called Bread and Roses, which was started by one of the architects of the union, a man named Mo Foner. And when I came, I said, let's get the members' stories. Let's get them to write. Let's get them to read more and hear one another. And we started there.
But you've also encouraged people to tell their stories through photography, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I started a program that went on for many years called Unseen America, where we gave cameras and 12-week classes with professional photographers to about 600 groups of people, migrant workers and nannies and home care workers, to tell the stories of their lives from the perspective of what they see. And we had many, many exhibits. It was the only labor exhibit in the U.S. Department of Labor.
Wow.
Unbelievable, right? And we had 1,000 workers at the Guggenheim Museum, the only time that's ever happened.
As you pointed out, and you didn't even have to point it out, we know that we live in troubling times. Where do you see the world headed today?
Oh, what a question. Where's the world headed? You know, I'm an optimist. This is a weird thing to say today in these days, but I'm an optimist. And I believe people in their hearts are good, which doesn't mean that there aren't bad people and bad politics and bad cycles of life and
But that they can't be led astray.
that they can't be led astray. But I always believe that in the end, good will win out. And that's certainly been my experience in life. You know, we live in a time where it's really difficult to imagine the end of the war in Israel and Gaza and the presidential election. You know, there's so many parts of the world that are suffering at this moment.
Right.
But I believe in the human spirit, and I believe in good stories.
I'd like you to read an excerpt from your book about Middlefield.
Okay. We are a family made by place, a family not by blood, not because of ancestry or the immigration patterns, not because of any particular religion or intellectual proclivity. We are not all in book groups. We do not all fish or farm or read the same newspaper. We do not vote the same or dream the same either. I never found the place I wanted to be until Middlefield. I never consciously thought about staying put. I am a theoretical wanderer, child of the 70s. I've never been to India or Bhutan or Tanzania or Nepal, but I want to go. I've wanted to go for years. I'm one of those vague women with vague ideas about politics, about art, about daily life, marriage, the Supreme Court, even religion. I thought I understood right and wrong and why people did what they did until we came to live here, until we had no choice but to all live together.
I think we're all on needles and pins about what's going to happen in the election. What are you thinking? What are you thinking about that?
I'm extremely nervous. I think that it's an impossible time. It's an impossible election. It's an impossible time. And I think that if women in this country vote, and if young people in this country vote, and if Taylor Swift succeeds in signing up 1 trillion people under the age of 25, I think we'll be okay.
Who do you see that you feel is doing good work, either in the kind of work that you do or politically or whatever?
Stacey Abrams. I want her to be president. I'll tell you, I met Stacey Abrams many years ago at a Emily's List lunch. Maybe you were there too. And
I think I was, actually.
Yeah. And I went up to her afterwards and said, I never heard a speaker like you. I want to come and work for you. And she said, give me your card. She gave me her card. And then 3 years later, she came to speak again. And I walked up to her and she said, Esther Cohen, don't tell me you're going to work for me. You never did. She remembered. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I will. I want you to be president. And I still do.
What has she been doing lately? Now, she's an attorney in Atlanta.
She's still thinking about starting a national platform. She's doing a bunch of things. But Stacey Abrams is the person who holds my vote. She's the person I would like to see as the president of this country.
What motivated you to write this particular book? You've written a number of books.
Right. You know, I felt like the place where we were living was amazing. And the only way I knew how to tell you and everybody else about the people who lived there was to write it down. I wanted to write it down. And I wanted to do these reading and writing workshops in unexpected places, like the Lutheran Evangelical Church in Cairo, New York, where people hear me read a little and then they write it down. And I wanted that to be a process of creating a large us. That was my notion. And I thought that in order to do that, I had to first create my own us, all of us, and then bring everybody else into it, like the baristas.
Right. And what do you hope people will take from your book?
Well, you know, my friend Fran, who was an early reader of my book and who liked it, I remember who liked it and who didn't, because that kind of thing stays with you, right?
Right.
She said, your book makes me want to go outside and listen to everybody. And that's what I was hoping. You know, it's only a book. I mean, it's not the cure for cancer or some information that's going to change the lives of all of us. It's not. It doesn't tell you how to sleep well, which I don't do, and, you know, how to eat well, which I also don't do. It's more about how do we hear one another? How do we hear one another? I wanted the book to make you want to hear your neighbors, whoever they are and whatever they believe.
Yeah. So what's next?
I have 16 events around this book coming up to bring in other people's stories. I want to bring in as many stories as I can.
So at these events, you read from your book, and do they read from their writings, or what?
I read from my book, and then I give them a prompt, and then they write. But I'll give you a recent example from 2 days ago. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment on the Upper West Side, and beneath me is an extremely expensive, kind of insane, very curated store. And the store has, the perfect potato, and it's like $3.50 or something. It's ridiculous a little bit. But I go in there a lot, and they sell my books in that store, and they sell a lot of them, who knows why. I can't believe the same person who pays $3 for the potato is going to want to read me, but they do. And so I was in there a couple days ago, and I said, I'd like everybody in here to write, in the store to write. Is there a way that we can do that? And the manager said, you can try. And I said, okay, bring me the little brown paper bags, beautiful little bags that they put the $6 pastries in. I'd buy the pastry for the bag. We handed them out, and everybody wrote on the bags, and I gave them one prompt. The prompt was Steve, which always works. Everyone has a Steve story, no matter who they are, what they believe, what their religion is, how old they are. Everyone on the planet has a Steve story.
Okay.
And the whole store wrote Steve stories. And I felt like, okay, you can see and they were thrilled with reading and writing their Steve stories. And they connected in a way that they hadn't when they walked in to buy the $3 potato. So that's my thing.
Okay. Well, thank you for your work on behalf of working class people and for encouraging people to write and to tell their stories and hopefully to understand each other better. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to thank Esther Cohen for joining me. Her book, All of Us, Stories and Poems Along Route 17, is available online and in bookstores. And to learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at 1-to-1 CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.